the wolfless Omega, found him shot, protecting his twin pups. Unaware he was the Alpha King. Fate doesn't knock, Guinevere. It breaks down the door and bleeds on your floorboards, Estelle had once warned, her voice raspy with the smoke of 1,000 herbal cigarettes. Guinevere Eldamore stared down at the red snow staining the hem of her skirts, the metallic tang of blood overpowering the scent of pine. He's not going to make it, a small, trembling voice whispered from behind a snow-dusted spruce. Guinevere tightened her grip on her basket of winter roots, her eyes narrowing at the carnage before her. "If he dies," she muttered, stepping into the crimson slush, "then I'll have to dig 3 graves in frozen ground, and I really hate digging." The winter in Blackwood Ridge did not forgive. It merely tolerated the strong and buried the weak. Guinevere Eldamore knew this better than anyone. Born without an inner wolf, a genetic anomaly that made her the wolfless Omega. She was the lowest caste in a society ruled by fang and claw. She was a ghost in the machine of the wolf kingdom, living on the fringes in a drafty, settling cabin where the designated pack lands ended and the wild, lawless, unclaimed territories began. She had gone out for frostberries and staunch root, essential ingredients for the healing salves she sold in the village market to survive. The air was biting, a physical weight against her skin, but the cold was safer than the village. Out here, the only predators were bears and hunger. Or so she had thought. She hadn't expected to find a war zone in her backyard. The clearing was decimated. Ancient pines were snapped like matchsticks. The earth churned up as if a plough had run through the permafrost. In the center of the devastation lay a man. He was massive, his frame dwarfing the blood-soaked snow beneath him. He wore tattered tactical gear, the Kevlar shredded not by machinery, but by claws, huge, unnatural claws. But it was what, or who, he was shielding that stopped Guinevere's heart. Curled into the curve of his broken body were 2 children, no older than 5. They were shivering violently, their wide eyes reflecting the grey, unforgiving sky. They were pristine, untouched by the violence that had ravaged their protector, a testament to the brutality with which he had fought. "Stay back," the man rasped. His voice was a subterranean rumble, vibrating through the cold air like a warning growl. He didn't open his eyes, but his hand moved, fingers curling around a jagged piece of silver shrapnel embedded in his thigh. Guinevere didn't retreat. She stepped closer, her boots crunching loudly on the ice-crusted snow. "You have 3 silver bullets in your chest, 1 in your shoulder, and your leg is a mess," she observed, her tone clinical, detached. It was a defense mechanism. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford, not when the scent of death was this thick. "If you move, the migration of that silver into your bloodstream will speed up. You'll be dead in minutes." The man's eyes snapped open. They were the color of a stormy sea. Turbulence trapped in irises of grey and blue, swirling with a pain so deep it looked like madness. "Who sent you?" he growled, the sound ending in a wet, rattling cough. Blood, dark and ominous, spilled over his lips, staining his chin. "My stomach sent me. I was looking for roots," Guinevere said dryly. She knelt beside him, ignoring the primal aura of power radiating off him. Even dying, he felt like a thunderstorm about to break, a pressure that would have forced a shifter to their knees. But Guinevere had no wolf to submit. "If I wanted to kill you, I'd just let the cold do it. It's much cleaner." She looked at the children, twins. 1 boy, 1 girl. They had the same storm-grey eyes as the man, wide with a terror that no child should ever know. The girl was clutching the man's tactical vest so hard her knuckles were white, burying her face in the ruined fabric. Are you the witch?" the little boy asked, his voice trembling, his breath puffing out in small white clouds. "I'm a herbalist," Guinevere corrected, pulling a thick wool blanket from her oversized gathering basket. "And you two are freezing." "Don't touch them," the man snarled, trying to rise. His arms shook, muscles straining against the poison coursing through him. The veins in his neck bulged, black lines tracking the spread of the silver nitrate. "I'm not the one you need to worry about," Guinevere said, her gaze snapping to the tree line. The wind had shifted. It carried the scent of sulfur, exhaust, and processed wolfsbane, the signature of the Hunters Guild, or worse, rival shifters using illegal rounds. "Whoever did this to you, they're circling back. I can hear the engines." The man went rigid. He heard it too, the distant, hornet-like roar of snowmobiles cutting through the valley. "Can you walk?" she asked, though she knew the answer. "I can fight," he lied, gritting his teeth. "Right. You can fight the snow angels, maybe," Guinevere said, standing up and brushing the snow from her knees. She grabbed the collar of his vest, testing his weight. He was heavy, dense with muscle. "I have a sled hidden in the brush for hauling firewood. If you want these pups to see tomorrow, you're going to have to let the wolfless drag you." The man looked at her then, really looked at her. He sniffed the air, confusion clouding his pain-riddled gaze. "You have no scent," he murmured, his consciousness fading. "You're nothing. I'm your only option," she retorted, staring him down. She whistled, a sharp, piercing sound that cut through the wind. From the undergrowth, a large, shaggy mule emerged. Not a shifter, just a stubborn beast named Barnaby, who hated the snow almost as much as Guinevere did. "Help me load him," Guinevere ordered the twins, her voice softening. "Grab his legs. On 3. 1, 2, 3. It was a chaotic, desperate struggle. The man, Cassian, though she didn't know his name yet, was dead weight. Every movement caused him agony. But he didn't scream. He just watched Guinevere with those terrifying, intelligent eyes, tracking her movements until the pain finally dragged him into the dark. The cabin smelled of dried sage, lavender, and the copper stench of surgery. It was a small space, cluttered with drying herbs hanging from the rafters and jars of strange liquids lining the shelves, but it was warm. Guinevere's hands were stained red to the elbows. The fire roared in the hearth, casting long, dancing shadows against the log walls, but the heat did nothing to melt the ice in her veins. She had spent the last 2 hours playing God, waging a war against the silver poison that sought to stop the stranger's heart. "Pass me the forceps," she commanded softly, not looking up from the ruined flesh of the man's shoulder. The little girl, who had said her name was Ilara, handed the instrument over with shaking hands. She stood on a stool, her eyes huge, watching the blood flow with a morbid fascination. The boy, Finn, was sitting on the edge of the bed, wiping his father's forehead with a damp cloth, his small face a mask of fierce determination. "Is Daddy going to wake up?" Finn asked, his voice barely a whisper. "He's stubborn," Guinevere muttered, digging the metal tip into the puckered wound. The silver burned his flesh, sizzling on contact, sending wisps of acrid smoke into the air. People this stubborn usually survive just to annoy everyone else. She extracted the bullet, a heavy, engraved slug, and dropped it into a metal bowl. Clink. It was the fourth one. The sound was like a church bell in the quiet room. "Why can't he heal?" Ilara whispered, tears finally spilling over. "He always heals. He's the strongest." "Silver nitrate," Guinevere explained, her voice steady as she focused on stitching the wound with a needle threaded with sterilized gut. "It blocks the wolf's regenerative abilities. It poisons the blood, stops the cells from knitting together. I've given him a poultice of drawing root and activated charcoal to pull the toxin out, but his body has to do the rest." She tied off the suture with a practiced knot and stepped back, wiping her forehead with her forearm, careful not to smear blood on her face. The stranger lay pale and still on her bed, his chest rising and falling in shallow, hitching breaths. He took up the entire mattress, his feet hanging off the end. His scars told stories of 100 battles, claw marks, burned tissue, old bullet wounds. This wasn't a rogue. Rogues were scrappy, thin, desperate. This man was built like a fortress. His hands were calloused from weapons, not just survival. "You two need to eat," Guinevere said, turning to the cast-iron stove where a venison stew was bubbling. "I added immune-boosting mushrooms. It will help with the shock." "We aren't hungry," Finn said stubbornly, crossing his arms. "If you don't eat, you'll be too weak to help him when he wakes up," Guinevere lied smoothly. "He'll need water, and someone to change his bandages. Weak helpers are no helpers at all." That got them. They practically ran to the small wooden table, scrambling onto the benches. As they ate, Guinevere examined the tactical vest she had cut off the man. The material was high-grade military weave, expensive and rare, capable of stopping standard rounds. There were no insignias, no pack markings. That was intentional. Someone had gone to great lengths to be anonymous. Inside one of the hidden pockets, sewn into the lining, she felt a hard lump. She ripped the seam and pulled out a heavy signet ring on a thick chain. She held it up to the firelight. It was black iron, cold and heavy, embossed with a crest she didn't recognize, a raven clutching a crown of thorns. It felt ancient, buzzing with a dormant energy that made her fingertips tingle. "That's Daddy's," Ilara said, her mouth full of stew. "He says it's for when we go home." "Where is home?" Guinevere asked casually, slipping the ring into her apron pocket. The twins exchanged a look, a practiced, fearful look that spoke of secrets kept too long. "We don't know," Finn said quietly. "We move a lot. Daddy says home is where we are together." Running, Guinevere thought, a chill crawling up her spine. They're running from something powerful, something that can afford silver bullets and snowmobiles. A groan from the bed shattered the quiet. Guinevere was at his side in a second. The man was thrashing, his eyes squeezed shut, caught in the throes of a fever dream. "Gabriel, the flank," he muttered, his voice thick with delirium. "Don't let them take the pups." "Frederick, you traitor! I'll kill you!" Guinevere placed a cool hand on his burning forehead. "Shh! You're safe. The pups are safe." His eyes flew open. In an instant, his hand shot out, grabbing Guinevere by the throat. It wasn't a choke meant to kill, but a hold meant to immobilize. He pulled her down until her face was inches from his. "Where are they?" he hissed, his pupils fully dilated, swallowing the grey irises. "Eating venison stew," Guinevere choked out, refusing to claw at his hand. Showing fear to a confused alpha was a death sentence. You had to show dominance, or at least indifference. "Let go, or I'll use the scalpel." He blinked, the haze clearing slightly as the scent of the stew and the lack of fear scent from her registered. He looked past her, seeing the twins watching with wide, terrified eyes. His grip loosened, and he dropped his hand, falling back against the pillows with a groan of frustration and weakness. "You," he breathed, recognizing her, the wolfless. "Guinevere," she corrected, rubbing the red marks forming on her neck. "And you're welcome. I didn't ask to be saved." "Your children didn't ask to be orphans," she snapped. The harshness of her tone surprised him. Most Omegas cowered before Alphas. Wolfless ones usually groveled in the dirt. "You lost a lot of blood. The silver is out, but you need to rest. If you tear those stitches, I'm not sewing you up again. I have better things to do." He watched her, calculating, assessing the threat level. "I am Cassian." "Just Cassian, for now." "Well, just Cassian," Guinevere said, picking up the bowl of bloody bullets and carrying it to the door. "You owe me a new set of sheets, and an explanation, eventually." 3 days passed in a blur of tension and snow. The storm outside had turned into a blizzard, a white curtain that sealed them into the cabin. It was a blessing in disguise. The heavy snowfall covered their tracks, and the howling wind masked their scents from anything patrolling the woods. Cassian heeled with terrifying speed. It was unnatural. By the second day, he was sitting up, eating enough for 3 men. By the third, he was pacing the small cabin like a caged tiger, testing the limits of his healing muscles. The dynamic in the cabin was strange, domestic, yet edged with a razor-sharp threat. Guinevere watched him from her workbench, where she was grinding dried moonshade leaves into a fine powder. He was stripping a handgun he had pulled from his boot, cleaning it with one of her oil rags. The twins were playing on the rug with carved wooden figures Guinevere had made years ago, wolves, bears, and rabbits. "You're good with them," Cassian said, his voice low, not looking up from the gun. The slide clicked into place with a lethal snap. "They're children. They're easy," Guinevere replied, not pausing in her grinding. "They tell you what they need. It's adults who are complicated. Adults lie." "Why do you live out here alone?" He finally looked at her. "A wolfless woman in the unclaimed territories. It's suicide. You have no protection, no pack." "It's peaceful," she countered. "In the pack lands, I'm a freak of nature, an omen of bad luck. Here, I'm just part of the food chain. The bears don't care about my genetics. They just care if I run." "You have no scent," he repeated, a fixation of his. "It's unsettling. I can't smell your fear. I can't smell your intentions. It's like talking to a statue." "Maybe I don't have any intentions." Cassian walked to the frosted window, wiping a circle in the glass to peer out. He was shirtless, the bandages stark white against his tanned skin. The tattoo on his back was visible now, a massive, intricate mural of storms and ravens that moved when he flexed. It was the mark of a high lineage, perhaps even royalty, though Guinevere dared not voice the thought. "Everyone has intentions," Cassian said, his voice darkening. "You saved a man you don't know. You're harboring fugitives. Why? What do you want?" "Because I saw 2 children who looked at you like you hung the moon," she said simply. "And because I know what it's like to be hunted, to be looked at like prey." A shadow crossed his face. He turned from the window. "The people hunting us, they aren't just rogues. They are authorized." Guinevere froze, the pestle hovering over the mortar. "Authorized by who?" "The council," he lied. She could tell it was a lie by the slight twitch in his jaw, but it was close enough to the truth to chill her blood. "We were betrayed. My beta. He turned on us." "Frederick?" she asked, recalling the name he mumbled in his fever. Cassian stiffened. He turned slowly, his movement predatory. "You listen to a man when he sleeps?" "I listen to a man when he screams," she corrected, refusing to back down. "Who is Frederick Lakeshire?" Cassian's jaw tightened. "A man who will burn for what he did. A man who wants my children dead to secure a legacy that isn't his." Before he could elaborate, a sound cut through the howling wind, a heavy, rhythmic thumping that vibrated the jars on the shelves. Rotors. Guinevere dropped the pestle. Helicopter. Low altitude. Cassian was moving before she finished the word. He grabbed the twins, shoving them under the heavy oak bed. "Stay silent," he commanded, his voice shifting into the alpha tone that compelled absolute obedience. The twins froze instantly, eyes wide. He turned to Guinevere. He had the gun in his hand, but he looked at her with a flicker of hesitation. "Do you have a cellar?" "Trapdoor under the rug," she whispered, kicking the woven rug aside to reveal the iron ring. "Get in." "No," she said, grabbing her heavy wool shawl. "If they scan the cabin with thermal, they'll see heat signatures. If no one answers the door, they'll burn it down. They need to see a resident." "Guinevere, I'm wolfless," she hissed, pushing him toward the hole. "I don't register as a threat. Hide yourself. Hide the pups. I'll handle them. If they touch you, he whispered, grabbing her arm. The heat of his hand burned through her sleeve. For a split second, the distance between them vanished. It wasn't gratitude in his eyes. It was possessiveness, the instinct to protect what was his. And somehow, in 3 days, she had become his responsibility. If they hurt you, I will slaughter them all. Go, she shoved him down. She slammed the trapdoor shut and threw the rug over it just as a heavy fist pounded on the cabin door. Bam, bam, bam. Guinevere smoothed her hair, grabbed a kitchen knife, making it look like she was chopping vegetables, and walked to the door. She took a breath, masking her terror with the mask of the grumpy, eccentric hermit she had perfected over years. She opened the door. Standing there, flanked by 2 armed enforcers in black tactical gear, was a woman in a pristine white fur coat. Her lipstick was as red as the blood Guinevere had scrubbed off the floor days ago. "Goldthorn," Guinevere said, her voice dripping with disdain. The woman smiled, revealing teeth that were too white, too sharp. "Hello, Gwyn. We're looking for a stray dog. A big one. Have you seen anything unusual?" Guinevere leaned against the doorframe, blocking the view inside. "In this blizzard? Only the wind and fools." Goldthorn's eyes drifted past Guinevere, scanning the interior of the cabin. "It smells like sickness in there, dear. And is that male sweat? I didn't think you had it in you." Guinevere's heart hammered against her ribs. "I'm an herbalist, Goldthorn. I treat sick travelers, even the male ones." "Is that so?" Goldthorn stepped closer, the scent of expensive perfume and rotting lilies wafting off her. "Then you won't mind if we come in and take a look." It wasn't a question. Guinevere tightened her grip on the knife handle hidden behind the door. Beneath the floorboards, she knew Cassian was listening, the gun trained on the ceiling, waiting for the first scream. "Come in, then," Guinevere said, stepping back. "But wipe your feet. I just mopped." The cabin door creaked open, admitting a gust of freezing wind that swirled the snow across the threshold. But colder than the wind was the woman who stepped inside. Goldthorn. She brought with her the overwhelming scent of synthetic lilies and rot, a perfume meant to mask the stench of the blood she spilled for a living. She peeled off a pristine white leather glove, her eyes sweeping the room with the precision of a hawk spotting a field mouse. 2 enforcers squeezed in behind her, their bulk filling the small space, assault rifles held at low ready. They smelled of wet dog and processed adrenaline. Guinevere didn't retreat. She stood by the iron stove, her hand resting near a heavy glass jar of powdered nightshade. It was a bluff. She couldn't weaponize it fast enough to stop 3 shifters, but the weight of the glass steadied her trembling hands. "Cozy," Goldthorn drawled, running a manicured finger along the edge of the rough-hewn wooden table. She inspected the dust on her fingertip with a grimace. "Dusty, but cozy, like a grave." "State your business, Goldthorn." "My tea is getting cold," Guinevere said, her voice flat, devoid of the deference usually afforded to high-ranking alphas. "My business is the crown, darling. We're hunting a traitor, a man who stole something very precious from the capital." Goldthorn turned, her heels clicking ominously on the floorboards. Her gaze landed on the trash bin Guinevere hadn't had time to empty. She walked to it, picking up a piece of gauze stained with dark arterial blood using 2 fingers. "Heavy bleeder. This is fresh, and it smells expensive." The air in the room grew heavy, suffocating. The silence from beneath the floorboards was deafening to Guinevere, though she prayed the thick, bare hide rug muffled the heartbeats of the 3 fugitives huddled in the dark cellar. "A woodcutter," Guinevere lied, the fabrication slipping easily from her tongue, practiced over years of hiding her own secrets. "Axe slipped, nearly took his foot off. I patched him up and sent him on his way an hour ago." "An hour ago?" Goldthorn raised a sculpted eyebrow. In this storm? He'd be dead before he reached the tree line. He was a shifter. He'll heal. Guinevere shrugged, turning to stir her tea, feigning indifference. Or he won't. I'm paid to stitch, not to babysit. Survival is his problem. Goldthorn dropped the bloody gauze back into the bin and stepped closer to Guinevere. The woman was an alpha female, radiating a dominance that usually made Omegas drop to their knees and expose their throats. But Guinevere just stared back. Her lack of a wolf made her immune to the biological pressure, a fact that always infuriated high-ranking shifters. To them, she was a blank space where a soul should be. You know, Gwyn, Goldthorn whispered, leaning in until Guinevere could see the pores beneath her heavy foundation. Frederick Lakeshire has placed a bounty on this man's head that could buy you a castle in the Sunlands. You could leave this hovel. You could be someone. You could buy a new history. I am someone, Guinevere replied coldly, her eyes locking onto Goldthorn's. I'm the person who knows which tea will cure your headache and which one will stop your heart in 3 beats. Would you like a cup? Goldthorn's eyes narrowed into slits. For a second, violence hung in the air like static electricity. The enforcers shifted, fingers tightening on their triggers. Then Goldthorn laughed, a sharp, brittle sound like breaking glass. You're entertaining, Wolfless. Useless but entertaining. She turned to her men, her amusement vanishing instantly. Check the perimeter. Burn the woodshed if you have to. If the dog is out there, flush him out. She walked to the door, pausing with her hand on the latch. Her gaze drifted down to the rug. The corner was slightly askew. Guinevere's heart slammed against her ribs. She knows. Goldthorn tapped her chin, considering. Then she shrugged. If you see him, Guinevere, don't try to be a hero. He's a monster. He killed the king, you know. She opened the door and swept out into the snow, the wind howling as if to chase her away. Guinevere didn't move until the roar of the snowmobiles faded into the distance. Only then did she lock the door, slide the deadbolt, and collapse to her knees, ripping the rug back with frantic hands. She yanked the trapdoor open. Cassian was there, crouched in the darkness, his body curled protectively over the twins. His gun was pointed directly at her face. He lowered it slowly, his chest heaving. His eyes were glowing, a luminescent, terrifying violet that lit up the cramped cellar. She lied, he growled, climbing out and pulling the weeping children up with him. I didn't kill the king. I know, Guinevere breathed, offering a shaking hand to pull Ilara up. Because you are the king. The revelation hung in the air, heavier than the smoke from the fireplace. Cassian froze mid-step. The twins, sensing the shift in atmosphere, clung to his legs, burying their faces in his pants. He looked at Guinevere, really looked at her, stripping away the layers of the herbalist to find the woman beneath. He saw not just a healer, but a strategist. How long have you known? He asked, his voice devoid of the deception he had worn for days. It was the voice of a man used to commanding armies, yet currently stripped of everything but his truth. The ring, Guinevere said, walking to the window to check the blinds, her movements sharp and jerky. The crest of the raven and thorns. It hasn't been worn by anyone but the monarch since the Great War. And then, the violet eyes. Only the royal bloodline carries the violet fire. You can hide your scent, Cassian, but you can't hide your soul. Cassian sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of an entire nation. He limped to the nearest chair and sat heavily, the wood creaking under his bulk. He wasn't the rugged soldier anymore. He was a ruler in exile, a king without a throne. If you knew, why did you save me? He asked quietly. My laws, they haven't been kind to your kind. I signed the decrees myself. Your laws pushed me to the edge of the world, Guinevere said, turning to face him. Her anger was there, simmering, but controlled, a cold flame. You banned the wolfless from the cities. You claimed we were genetically impure, weak, a contagion to the pack. I was advised that the wolfless gene was a pathogen, Cassian admitted, looking down at his hands that had signed those papers, hands that had also held his children through the night. Frederick. The council. They presented data. Evidence of madness, of frailty. I thought I was protecting the pack. You were protecting your prejudice, Guinevere countered. She walked over to the table and poured a glass of water, her hand shaking slightly. But I didn't save the king. I saved a father who was willing to take a bullet for his children. That man. He's worth saving. The king? I'm still deciding. Finn tugged on Cassian's pants. Daddy, are you the king? Does that mean I get a pony? The innocence of the question shattered the tension like a stone through a window. Cassian let out a short, disbelief-laden laugh. He pulled Finn onto his lap, wincing as the movement pulled at his stitches. It means, Cassian said softly, brushing the hair from his son's forehead with a tenderness that made Guinevere's chest ache, that a lot of bad men want to hurt us, and it means we have to be very, very brave. Braver than knights. We can't stay here, Guinevere stated, shifting into survival mode. Goldthorn isn't stupid. She saw the bandages. She felt the heat in the room. She'll come back with a torture crew, not just 2 grunts. We have to leave before sunrise. The pass is blocked by snow, Cassian said, rubbing his temple. We'll never make it to the Loyalist territories in the east. It's a death march. We aren't going east, Guinevere said, pulling a map from a high shelf. She spread it out on the table among the breadcrumbs and herbs. It was hand-drawn, detailing the unclaimed territories, a labyrinth of canyons, frozen lakes, and dense forests that no official mapmaker dared to chart. We're going north, to the Frostbite Sanctuary. Cassian frowned. That's a myth. A bedtime story for pups. A city of ghosts. It's a fortress, Guinevere corrected, tracing a hidden path with her finger. Built by the wolfless 50 years ago. It's hidden, self-sustaining, and impossible to track if you don't know the way. I can get you there. And why would you help me? Cassian asked, his violet eyes locking onto hers. I am the architect of your suffering. I am the reason you live in this cabin. Guinevere looked at the twins, who were now sharing a piece of bread, oblivious to the political storm swirling around them. Because the enemy of my enemy is my friend, she said. And because if Frederick Lakeshire takes the throne, he won't just banish the wolfless. He'll exterminate us. And he'll kill those children to secure his line. Cassian stood up, closing the distance between them. The sheer size of him was overwhelming. He smelled of pine, rain, and raw, potent power. He reached out, his rough fingers grazing her jawline. It was a touch so tender it stole the breath from her lungs. I have commanded armies, he murmured, his voice dropping to a husky whisper that vibrated against her skin. I have negotiated treaties with warlords, but I have never met anyone like you, Guinevere Eldermore. You have no wolf, yet you have more fire in you than my entire council. Guinevere didn't pull away. Her heart, usually a guarded fortress, betrayed her with a traitorous flutter. Flattery won't keep your toes from freezing, Your Majesty. Pack your gear. He held her gaze for a second longer, the electricity between them crackling, undeniable. Cassian, he corrected. Just Cassian. The escape began under the cover of a moonless night, the darkness absolute and unforgiving. Barnaby the mule snorted his displeasure as Guinevere loaded the last of the supplies onto the sled. The twins were bundled into a nest of furs in the center, looking like 2 small, anxious bear cubs. Cassian took the lead, his gun drawn, his senses extended outward like a radar dish. The cold was brutal. It was the kind of cold that solidified breath in the lungs and turned eyelashes into ice. Every step was a battle against the deep drift. They moved in silence for hours, navigating the dense pine forest. Guinevere guided them through game trails and frozen stream beds, avoiding the main roads where Frederick's patrols would be waiting. "We need to rest," Cassian signaled around dawn. He looked pale, the exertion taking a toll on his healing body. They stopped in a small hollow, beneath the roots of a fallen giant redwood. Guinevere passed around a thermos of hot broth. "How much further?" Ilara asked, her voice small and brittle. 2 days, Guinevere said cheerfully, though worry gnawed at her gut like a starving rat. "Think of it as an adventure, Ilara, like in the stories." "I don't like this adventure," Finn grumbled. "I want to go home." Cassian pulled them close. "I know, buddy, I know." He looked at Guinevere over their heads. His eyes were alert, scanning the tree line. "We're being followed." Guinevere stiffened. "I covered our tracks. I used the pepper spray on the trail to mask the scent." "Not by wolves," Cassian said grimly, tilting his head. "Drones." A low hum, like a swarm of angry bees, drifted over the ridge. "Move," Cassian ordered, grabbing the sled's harness. "Run!" They broke into a sprint. The mule brayed in protest, but galloped alongside them. The hum grew louder, turning into a mechanical shriek. Above the trees, 3 black quadcopters appeared, red lights scanning the snow like demonic eyes. Thwip, thwip, thwip. Bullets kicked up the snow around them. "Get to the trees!" Guinevere screamed, shoving the mule toward the denser canopy. Cassian spun around, raising his handgun. He fired 3 shots in rapid succession. Bang! 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 One of the drones exploded in a shower of sparks and plastic, spiraling into a snowbank. "Go, I'll draw their fire!" Cassian roared. "No!" Guinevere shouted. She reached into her belt pouch and pulled out a glass sphere filled with a swirling silver powder. It was a flashbang of her own invention, magnesium and ground crystal. She hurled it into the air. Crack! A blinding white light detonated, washing out the forest in pure brilliance. The sensors on the remaining drones were overloaded. They wavered, spinning erratically, crashing into the branches. "Now!" Guinevere grabbed Cassian's arm. They scrambled down a steep ravine, sliding on the ice, the sled skidding dangerously. They hit the bottom of the gully, breathless and bruised. But they weren't alone. Blocking the other end of the ravine was a figure. He was tall, lean, and wearing a long grey coat that looked too clean for the wilderness. He held a long sword that glowed with a faint, blue rune light. Frederick Lakeshire. He smiled, a slow, predatory expression that chilled Guinevere more than the wind. Flanking him were 6 elite guards in full transformation, massive, hulking wolves with steel armor plating bolted to their flanks. "Did you really think you could run from me, Cassian?" Frederick called out, his voice smooth and cultured. "And with a wolfless guide? How quaint. A king and his pet." Cassian stepped in front of Guinevere and the sled. He was wounded, exhausted, and outnumbered. But as he straightened his spine, the air pressure in the ravine dropped. The snow around his feet began to melt from the sheer heat of his aura. "Take the children," Cassian said to Guinevere, his voice calm, terrifyingly calm. "Run." "There is nowhere to run," Frederick laughed. "Give me the crown, Cassian, and perhaps I will let the little mutts live as pets." Something in Cassian snapped. He didn't shift. Instead, he let out a roar, a sound that wasn't human. It was a wave of kinetic force. The Alpha command. "Kneel!" The 6 wolf guards faltered. Their instincts screamed at them to submit to the king. They whined, lowering their bellies to the snow, fighting their own bodies. Frederick, however, just smirked. He tapped a metal device on his ear. "Technology, my old friend. Frequency dampeners. Your voice is just noise to us." He signaled, and the wolves shook off the command, their eyes turning red with chemically induced rage. They charged. "Guinevere, go!" Cassian screamed. But Guinevere didn't run. She saw the trap closing. She saw the death coming for the man who had looked at her with respect, not pity. She pulled her hunting knife. "I don't take orders from kings," she muttered. She slapped Barnaby's rump, sending the mule and the screaming twins bolting up a narrow deer path to safety. Then she turned back to the fight. Cassian met the first wolf mid-air. He caught the beast by the throat, his human strength amplified by adrenaline and royal blood, and slammed it into the rock wall. Bone crunched, but there were too many. 2 wolves circled him, snapping at his injured leg. Frederick watched, amused, stepping closer to finish it. Guinevere saw her opening, not for violence, but for chaos. Above the ravine, a massive shelf of snow hung precariously over the edge, a cornice built up by the blizzard. She didn't aim for the wolves. She aimed for the mountain. She grabbed a stick of dynamite she used for clearing stumps, lit the fuse, and threw it with all her might toward the overhanging ledge. "Cassian, cover!" she shrieked. The explosion was deafening. The mountain groaned, and then the sky fell. Tons of white death cascaded down into the ravine. Frederick's smile vanished as he looked up. The wolves stopped their attack, ears flattening. Cassian didn't look at the avalanche. He looked at Guinevere. He lunged, not away from the danger, but toward her. He tackled her, wrapping his massive body around hers, shielding her with his own flesh and bone, just as the world turned white and silent. The world was silence, a heavy, crushing silence that smelled of ice and ozone. Guinevere gasped, her lungs burning as she inhaled a pocket of stale air. She was pinned, not by the snow, but by a wall of muscle and heat. Cassian was arched over her, his back taking the full weight of the avalanche, his arms bracketed around her head to create a tiny, life-sustaining void. "Cassian?" she whispered, the darkness absolute. "I'm here," he gritted out. His voice was strained, tight with pain. "Are you hurt?" "No, you. I'll live. But this snow, it's heavy." They were trapped in a cocoon of ice. The intimacy was suffocating and electric. Guinevere could feel every beat of his heart against her chest, a frantic, powerful rhythm. His breath ghosted over her face, warm against the biting cold. In the darkness, the social strata that separated them, king and peasant, alpha and wolfless, dissolved. They were just 2 heartbeats in a grave of white. "The twins," Cassian's voice cracked. For the first time, the king sounded terrified. "Barnaby is smarter than most council members," Guinevere reassured him, reaching up to touch his face. Her fingers traced the rough stubble of his jaw, finding the sticky wetness of fresh blood near his temple. "He knows the path to the high ridge. He'll keep them safe." Cassian leaned into her touch. "You blew up a mountain, Guinevere." "I panicked," she admitted. "It seemed like a good idea at the time." A low rumble started deep in his chest, a laugh. "You are terrifying. Remind me to never anger you." Too late for that. The air was getting thin. "We have to dig," Cassian said, shifting. He groaned, the sound raw. "My leg is pinned." "Let me," Guinevere said. She wiggled one arm free, reaching into her boot for her chemically treated matches. She struck one against the sole. It flared with a brilliant blue magnesium light, illuminating their tiny prison. Cassian's eyes were squeezed shut, his face pale, sweat freezing on his brow. The blue light cast harsh shadows on his scars. He looked mortal, breakable, beautiful. "Hold on," she whispered. She used the heat of the flare to melt the ice packed around his trapped leg. As the water dripped away, he hissed in relief. Together they clawed their way up. It took an hour of agonizing work, digging through the packed powder until a hand broke the surface, grasping at the grey twilight. They dragged themselves out, gasping, collapsing onto the fresh snow. The ravine was gone, filled level with debris. There was no sign of Frederick or his wolves, buried deep beneath tons of rock and ice. The path, Guinevere wheezed, pointing up the slope. They found them a mile up the ridge. Barnaby was huddling under a rocky overhang, the twins tucked into his shaggy flank for warmth. When Finn saw Cassian limping through the snow, the scream of joy shattered the desolate quiet. "Daddy!" Cassian fell to his knees, catching both children as they barreled into him. He buried his face in their necks, inhaling their scent, shaking with the aftershocks of adrenaline. Guinevere watched, leaning against a pine tree, feeling an ache in her chest that had nothing to do with the cold. She turned to look north, toward the jagged peaks of the Frostbite Range. "We aren't safe yet," she said softly. "Frederick survived. I can feel it. Rats always find a way out." Cassian stood up, lifting Alara into his arms. He looked at Guinevere, his violet eyes burning with a new resolve. "Then let him come. He won't find a fugitive this time. He'll find a king." The Frostbite Sanctuary was not what Cassian expected. He had imagined a cave, a refugee camp of tents and misery. What he found, hidden inside the hollowed-out caldera of an extinct volcano, was a marvel of engineering. Geothermal steam rose from vents, heating the stone city. Buildings were carved directly into the obsidian rock, reinforced with steel and glass. Wind turbines spun silently on the ridges. It was a fortress of science, built by the very people the Wolf Kingdom had discarded as useless. "Welcome to the unwanted," Guinevere said, as they approached the massive steel gates. Guards in white winter camouflage intercepted them. They didn't hold spears or swords. They held high-powered pneumatic rifles. They were wolfless, men and women without the brute strength of shifters, but with the dangerous, sharp eyes of survivors. "Halt!" a woman with a scar running through her eyebrow commanded. "State your business." "I am Guinevere Eldermore. I bring travelers seeking asylum." The guard's eyes widened. "Eldermore, we thought you were dead. The council said—" "The council says a lot of things," Guinevere cut in. "Open the gate, Octavia. We have wounded." As they walked through the city, Cassian was silent. He saw schools, greenhouses, workshops. He saw a society functioning perfectly without the hierarchy of dominance he had been raised to believe was essential. They were ushered into the central command center. Octavia Mistwood, the leader of the sanctuary, paced before a bank of monitors. "You brought the Alpha King here," Octavia spat, slamming her hand on the table. "The man who signed the Exclusion Act. Are you insane, Guinevere?" "He didn't know," Guinevere defended, standing between Octavia and Cassian. "He was manipulated by Frederick." "Ignorance is not an excuse for genocide," Octavia yelled. "I agree," Cassian said. His voice was quiet, but it filled the room. He stepped forward, still limping, but moving with regal grace. He lowered his head, a gesture of submission no alpha ever showed to a wolfless. "I was blind. I let fear dictate my rule. I cannot undo the past, but I can offer you a future." "And what future is that?" Octavia sneered. "Alliance," Cassian said. "Frederick is coming. He has tech-enhanced wolves that ignore the alpha voice. You have technology. I have the crown. If we fight together, we reclaim the kingdom. If we don't, Frederick burns this sanctuary to the ground just for existing." Octavia stared at him, then at Guinevere. "Is he telling the truth?" "He took 3 bullets for his children," Guinevere said. "He's worth the risk." Octavia sighed, rubbing her temples. "Fine. But if he tries to give a single order, I shoot him myself." The alarm blared before Cassian could answer. Red lights strobed. On the monitors, the southern ridge lit up with thermal signatures. Hundreds of them. "He's here," Cassian growled, watching the screen. Frederick hadn't just come with a hunting party. He had brought the entire corrupt battalion of the Royal Guard, backed by armored snow tanks. He found us fast, Guinevere noted, suspicious. She looked at Cassian's tactical vest. The tracker wasn't in the vest. She grabbed his wrist, looking at the signet ring. It's the ring. It has a passive RFID chip. Standard royal protocol. Cassian looked at the ring, then at the monitors. He tracked his own crown. He's not here for the crown, Guinevere said, grabbing a satchel of chemical vials from a nearby table. He's here for the extinction. The battle for Frostbite Sanctuary was a collision of two worlds, ancient magic and desperate innovation. Frederick's forces breached the outer perimeter within the hour. The tech-enhanced wolves, massive beasts with hydraulic exoskeletons, tore through the steel gates like paper. But the wolfless were ready. Guinevere crouched on a catwalk overlooking the main plaza, a pneumatic rifle in her hands. Beside her, Cassian was directing the defense, not as a king commanding subjects, but as a soldier coordinating with equals. "They're pushing the left flank!" Cassian shouted into a radio. "Otavia, trigger the steam vents!" Below, geysers of scalding steam erupted from the floor, blinding the advancing wolves. The wolfless snipers, wearing thermal goggles, picked them off with tranquilizer darts loaded with concentrated wolfsbane. But Frederick was relentless. He strode into the plaza, his long coat billowing. He wasn't hiding behind his men anymore. He held a scepter topped with a jagged crystal, a device that emitted a high-frequency pulse that dropped shifters to their knees in agony. Cassian groaned, clutching his head as the sound hit him. The few shifter refugees in the sanctuary collapsed, bleeding from their ears. "Pathetic," Frederick laughed, his voice amplified. "Beasts pretending to be men, and men pretending to be beasts." He pointed the scepter at Cassian. "End him." 3 massive wolves, their eyes glowing red with the mind-control drugs, lunged at the incapacitated king. "No!" Guinevere dropped her rifle and grabbed a heavy canister from her belt. It wasn't a weapon. It was a distraction. She leaped from the catwalk. It was a suicidal drop, 20 feet down. She landed in a roll, popping up right between Cassian and the charging monsters. She smashed the canister on the ground. A cloud of purple gas exploded outward. It wasn't poison. It was synthesized pheromones, specifically the scent of a desperate, challenging alpha, distilled and concentrated 1,000 times over. The tech wolves skidded to a halt, their biological instincts overriding their cybernetic implants. The scent confused them. They turned on each other, snarling, fighting the invisible alpha. Frederick roared in frustration. "Kill her!" He raised the scepter, aiming a focused beam of sonic energy at Guinevere. Cassian moved, fighting through the pain of the frequency dampener, fueled by a rage that transcended biology. He shifted. Not fully. The silver in his blood still hindered him. But enough. Claws erupted from his fingers. His eyes went supernova violet. He launched himself at Frederick, tackling the usurper. The scepter skittered across the ice. The 2 men brawled, a brutal, ugly fight of fists and teeth. Frederick was fast, trained, and uninjured. He drew a silver dagger, driving it toward Cassian's heart. Guinevere saw the flash of metal. She didn't think. She grabbed the fallen scepter. She didn't know how to use the sonic weapon, but she knew mechanics. She reversed the polarity on the crystal housing and jammed the scepter into the nearest steam vent. "Cassian, down!" she screamed. Cassian kicked Frederick away and dropped flat. The scepter overloaded. A shockwave of pure concussive force exploded, shattering the glass of the surrounding buildings and knocking every standing combatant off their feet. The frequency dampener shattered. Silence returned to the plaza. Frederick lay groaning, his coat shredded, the dagger lost. He tried to crawl toward his radio to call reinforcements. A boot slammed down on his hand. Cassian stood over him. He was bleeding from a dozen wounds, his shirt torn, his chest heaving, but he stood tall. "The wolfless have no honor," Frederick spat, looking up at the wolfless guards circling him. "They are weak. They are my people, Cassian said, his voice resonating with the alpha tone, now unhindered. And you are under arrest for high treason, Frederick sneered. You can't hold me. The council is dissolved, Cassian said. He looked at Guinevere, who was dusting off her knees, looking fierce and alive and utterly magnificent. We're rewriting the laws. He held out his hand to Guinevere. She looked at the bloody, scarred hand of the king. Then she looked at his eyes. The violet fire was soft now, tender. She took it. Long live the king, she whispered, a smile tugging at her lips. No, Cassian corrected, pulling her to his side as the twins ran from the bunker to hug his legs. Long live the pack. All of us. The coronation was unlike any in history. There were no golden robes, only winter furs. There was no exclusionary decree. The Frostbite Sanctuary was declared the new capital of the North. Guinevere didn't take a title. She didn't need one. She stood at the king's right hand, the architect of a new age where strength was measured not by the beast within, but by the heart that endured. As Cassian placed the crown upon his head, he looked not at the cheering crowds, but at the woman who had found him dying in the snow and taught him how to truly live. Fate hadn't just broken down her door, it had built them a home. If this story of winter, wolves and defiance captured your heart, please leave a like and share it with a friend who believes in love against the odds. Don't forget to subscribe for more tales of romance and rebellion.